wonderful to see you all again as we come to consider the developmental theory in context of Montessori's own work. And tonight we are going to look at the work of Sigmund Freud and his influence on all that we do with children today. One of the most difficult things about the Freudian theory is that it is very difficult to collect any tangible evidence of right or wrong way of looking at the theory. And that in itself poses difficulties to researchers who always search for evidence of validity of any theory. Nonetheless, the fact that the theory is still alive and the fact that we have got many psychoanalysts who continue to work using his principles demonstrate that there is some evidence or some value to what he has taught us. And as we kind of meander or run through some of the theories, I hope you will feel that there is some validity to what he says, and that you have observed some of the features of his theory in your work with children. And it is really the work with children using the Montessori as a point of reference that is the purpose of this session tonight. So here we go. Freud developed his theory virtually around the same time as Montessori did. And he gives us a perspective of the unconscious mind of the individual and what this unconscious mind means for us as human beings. He believed that we are driven by sexual energy, which he called the libido. And this is what often puts off many people because they cannot see how this sexual energy is mirrored in children's behaviors. But if you see the libido as energy to life, then you have all witnessed the energy of the newborn to survive. You have all witnessed the energy of the baby learning to walk. You have witnessed the energy of the toddler exploring the environment. Tonight, I have witnessed the energy of our newborn baby of 2 months enjoying bath and moving her arms and legs in such a way that you think, oh, she must be a born swimmer. Anyway, so if you take the libido as energy without looking too much at the sexual implications of it, we certainly have got something to work with. Freud also recognized that we have all had 3 components of our personality, and those are the id, the ego, and the superego. Now, you all know about the id because it is the force that we witness with the newborns, we witness it with toddlers, and it is so prevalent in the life of the toddlers because they cannot defer gratification. They can only serve their own needs. It's very difficult for them to take on board the needs of somebody else because for them, the ego is a drive for survival at that moment. And of course, then comes the ego that begins to teach them that not everything is possible that I want, and that gradually I have to manage my gratification and put it on side for the better of the whole group. I hope that you are also recognizing this socialization process of the human being, which is in a way the main purpose of nursery education today. And then we have got the superego, which is supposed to be the moral watchdog on what we do. It is something that we all aspire. We all aspire to be better human beings, and we constantly struggle between what the id wants us to do and what we know is appropriate or not appropriate. And these three trends of the personality are kind of focus of our work with young children. And to help us understand how these traits unfold, we also need to consider Freud's stages of infantile sexuality. And for him, these stages are deeply connected with the human body. So the first stage refers to the mouse, and it's called the oral stage. It is the time when we learn to feed, and we feed from the mother or from a bottle, but gradually we are weaned off and we begin to eat solid food. And then the next step towards independence for the child relates to the child's of the anal stage, and that relates to potty training. And those of you who have worked with young children for quite a while may be observing that some of the issues of potty training have become really challenging since we have started to use disposable nappies. Many practitioners tell me that children still have nappies as they leave the nursery, when if in fact, only 30 years ago, when I started my nursery, we said, the children can come at 2.5 if they are potty trained. Nobody dares to say that today. It's totally un-PC to even mention potty training. It has become the task of the earliest practitioner to work with the parents to help the children potty train. And I think this is really relevant to our practice because if potty training is not done in a sensitive way, you know that the outcome of the crisis of the potty training can have lasting effects, the same way as the outcome of the crisis of not sensitive weaning can lead to crisis and personality difficulties. So believed Freud, and so believe lots of psychoanalysts today as well. And then, of course, we come to the genital state when the children are really interested in their parts of the body. And I remember in my very first teaching job, I had a girl who insisted on making the wee standing up because she wanted to be like the boys. Now, Freud tells us that these girls are kind of emasculated human beings where the penis was cut off and they are looking for it. Whilst I don't take it to this extreme, I really think that we need to accommodate the children's interest in each other's bodies. And this is why I think it's quite healthy for children at nursery age to share toilets so that they can come to know each other in their full body. And we have an opportunity to name the parts of the body in the correct way, or we can work with the parents on naming the parts of the body, because in a way that prepares the children in their own awareness of their body and describing their body. And it is a natural process. I need to embarrass my daughter who, when we lived in the flat, when she was 4 years old, she would go to the loo when we had visitors and she would say, "What are you doing? Are you sitting down or standing up?" Because that was of interest to her at the time. And I think if we deal with these questions in a totally natural way, it is part of your body, it will take away some of the mystery or some of the embarrassment that sometimes adults present when asked these questions. And as a result, that also gives the child a sense of unease, or they become aware that this is not easy for us. And of course, those questions of the part of the body also come things that are to do with the question where the children come from. And once again, this is something that you need to resolve with the parents in your environment, or you need to be quite clear about how you are going to discuss with the children in your environment, because it is important that there is consistency and there needs to be some authenticity in what you share with the children. Is difficult when you fudge it away, and certainly not appropriate to say that the baby has come with a stalk or been born under a bush or cabbage leaf or whatever. I don't know, whatever are the sayings in your countries. So these are the kind of foundations of what we have inherited from Freud, and they are foundation of something that we see very regularly in our practice. I hope that some of these little anecdotes resonate with you as participants or as practitioners. The person who is, for me, really relevant to our working with young children is Erikson, because he gives us much more overarching view of the child within society. He certainly considers the relationship of the child to the prime carer and to the wider group. And this is one of the reasons why his theory is called psychosocial. And it is one of the reasons why, or what is fascinating about Erikson is also that he's the only one who acknowledges that potentially our personality changes all the way through our life, that it doesn't stop at 18 or at the end of the fourth plane of development, that we continue to change, we continue to be influenced by our interactions with the wider environment. And reflecting on this personally, I certainly can see that as I don't travel to London every day, as I live more sedate life, I am beginning to be more reluctant to have adventures. Or my heart wants to have adventure, but then my head says, oh, well, you know, maybe not. So there are definitely changes to how we approach life as we go through life. What I also like about Erikson is that he acknowledges that with each stage of his development, there will be some kind of crisis. And he acknowledges that it is virtually impossible to go through life without crisis. It is how the crisis is managed by our prime carers or by those people who are close to us that will influence how the features of the personality develop. And he believes that with each stage of development, there is a basic characteristics of personality that will be nurtured. And it is particularly these characteristics which I really like. I love the idea that with the first stage of trust and mistrust, you will develop hope. I love the idea that this autonomy versus shame, you will develop will. That with initiative and guilt, you will develop purpose. And with the final stage, which is really looking at your capacity to be industrious, you develop competence. Now think about those characteristics. Wouldn't those be the things that you would like the children to take away with them when they leave your settings? Wouldn't you like them to be able to be hopeful, be able to use their will to the betterness of themselves as well as society, to be able to be purposeful in terms of how they choose to do things and feel really competent in whatever they choose to do. And I think that if we consider these features or these characteristics of the personality as described by Erikson, we will really feel that, or we can really feel, or we can witness them in our classrooms. Think about the importance of the child's autonomy. Think about how much we talk about independence. think about how much we talk about the child being able to concentrate in order to be able to use their initiative. But think also about what you do in relation to those experiences that potentially you offer to the children, but do you always give them the opportunity to use those experiences to the full? You know, how much are we constrained with our own agenda? How much are we all constrained by our own purpose of what we want to achieve with the children? How often do we help them to be really competent by encouraging their industry? You know, the industry may be something we find very useless, but it is meaningful to the child themselves. And of course, the first stage of Erikson's development, the trust versus mistrust, relies at the heart of how we see the care of the newborn and how we see the care of children in their first year of life. You can see it mirrored in the work of Montanaro in her understanding of the human being. She talks extensively about the relationship between the mother and the child. You can also see it in the way brain development has taken us. And we now know a little bit more about what happens to the brain when the child does not have sensitive upbringing. But above all, we see the value of this first stage of Erikson's development in the work of John Bowlby. And I think that John Bowlby was a psychoanalyst. He worked in the Tavistock Center, which is the key center alongside Anna Freud in UK to promote psychotherapeutic approach to children and adults. And his first research, or his most important research, explored the idea of the role of the mother in relationship to the child. And as you are probably aware, he initially wanted the mother, or saw the mother as the most important person in the child's life. In later research, he acknowledged that the role of the mother can be taken by a significant prime carer who offers consistency and predictability to the child. But we also know with people who have been adopted that question about the role of the mother continues to be a question. They continue to reflect, what was it about them that made them to be adopted, irrespective of how well the adoptive family taken care of those children. So there is something deeply rooted in our human psyche, which connects us with our birth mother and the role that she plays in our lives. It is interesting that John Bowlby's research continued to interest researchers further, and it was the work of Mary Ainsworth that gives us more insight into the relationship between the prime carer and the infant. What she acknowledges is that it is the quality of the care that really matter. It's not just being the person. It means how you care for the child that will influence your attachments. And it is generally agreed that the majority of children are really well attached. And so the majority of the children will not have deeply rooted psychological problems. The psychic fugues and psychic barriers that Montessori talks about, particularly in The Secret of Childhood, are not something that you meet regularly in your practice as a Montessori teacher. They are real extremes that often link to the way how the child was cared for quite early in their lives. Because if the barrier or the fugue to develop by the time the child is 3 or 4, there must have been some significant trauma in the life of the newborn in order to develop those barriers to life. And I think that for us, what is important, I don't want to go into the details of the different categories of attachment. What is important to remember that whatever the attachment pattern is, we will develop some kind of model of relationship. And Mary Ainsworth calls it the internal working model. And we use this model to interpret other relationships in our lives in the future. So we will use it as cross-reference. So if your relationship with other adults has not been particularly trusting, you will carry that lack of trust with you as you mature and as you establish other relationships. So for children who are not well attached, that poses a challenge of how they will relate to others as they grow up. And the most damaging type of attachment that we seem to notice is the chaotic one that is totally unpredictable. So where sometimes the adult is loving and accepting, and sometimes the adult is totally rejecting. So the child is not able to build up any sense of predictability. So this child is constantly vigilant about what will happen to them. And that happens with children who have been abused most significantly. So from our perspective as practitioners, what we want to take from Mary Ainsworth and from her model of attachment patterns is the importance that we are sensitive, we are predictable, and we are consistent. So that the child knows that whatever happens, we will behave in a consistent way. And in a way, that very much resonates with all the work of Philippa Perry, about whom we have talked about in the past. She always reminds us that inevitably we will not be perfect. Inevitably, there will be things we would have chosen to do differently as adults in relation to our children, and most definitely in relation to the children in our classrooms, but that it is important to be always available for them, so that you don't close the door, you are not too judgmental, that you go back to the child, you apologize for what has happened, and you open the door for further conversation. So consistency, sensitivity, reliability, and predictability are the features that you really need to think about as you work in your classroom. And it is more than predictability of the presentation, please. It is very much about predictability of your behaviors. And hopefully you will have enough support from your team when you feel that your patience is running out, that you will be able to step aside and say, please take over from me. I need to have a cup of tea or take a deep breath or look outside into the garden. Now, furthermore, the research into the brain in the first year of life also demonstrates that if the child is experiencing stress, the neural connections in the brain will not develop in a natural way. The neural connections will not flow as readily as possible. And we know that most neural connections are made in the first year of life. So you need to be really, if you work with infants or if you work with parents who need guidance on their parenting, the relationships that we develop in the first 12, 18 months of the child's life have powerful impact on their development, not only personally and socially, but also cognitively, because if the child experiences enormous amount of stress, the neural connections will not develop. And this is explaining it in the most simplistic way I can, without minimum jargon, because what we also know that many of the studies on the brain that were done 10 years ago have already been discredited. So this is a continued area of development, but there's a proviso that we need to create as optimum conditions for the newborn, as optimum conditions for the young children under the age of 3, so that not only their personality, but also their social and cognitive and physical skills can develop to their optimum within the culture in which they live. Now, in our briefing for tonight, we also mentioned Carl Jung, somebody about whom I know very, very little, and I must apologize about my ignorance. But when I dipped into various articles and various studies, I came to realize that the thing that he has to offer us is the fact that he is looking at collective unconscious. He's looking at the fact that as humanity, we share certain traits which are universal. And I think as we are exploring who we are, not only from the point of view of gender, but also from the cultural perspective and from the racial perspective, it is important to recognize that there are certain shared aspects of humanity which we all share and which are fundamental for our future. And the other thing that I really, really liked is that he continues to explore the influence of the personality on our creativity. So explores literature, he explores art, and how our personalities mirror, and how certain threads of creativity move across the world. You know, that somebody says, well, I have thought about this in the UK, but somebody can have exactly the same idea on the other part of the world, because there is some shared consciousness that we all benefit from. And for that reason, we need to look towards our aspirations for the children. We need to understand that these will also, as parents, will influence how our children develop and how they grow up, and how much freedom or lack of freedom, or how much we have imposed our aspirations on our children. All of this needs to be considered when we are thinking about the children of today, their personality and their social development. And that's about all I can say in extension to the blog that I have written. But I would like us to break into breakout rooms again, and I would like us to consider some of the questions for the breakouts, which are not questions. I think tonight they need to be reflections. We need to reflect on our practice in terms of consistency and predictability, in terms of children's physical independence, in terms of the initiative and how much we value, and of course, how we encourage the children's competence. So once again, we are very lucky to have Suzanne and Heidi to be the moderators alongside me, and dear Wendelin, who will organize us into breakout rooms, and let's talk in smaller groups. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, everybody, and welcome back. I wonder if Suzanne would be happy to feedback a little bit from her discussion group.
Absolutely. We had a really, really nice discussion in our group. So thank you to everybody that was there with me. Obviously, first of all, it was how do we bring the knowledge, the theory knowledge that was in the back of our minds when we studied, back to the forefront of the brain when we're now actually working with children and seeing these things unfold in real life. But I think the bulk of our conversation was actually just around finding consistency. We got sort of stuck there a little bit because the children that we have now, and we had sort of Africa and England in the room. I say Africa because Seychelles was in our room as well. But just looking at, we've got this sort of cosmopolitan classroom where we have children of different cultures, parents of different cultures, and practitioners of different cultures. So when it comes to certain developmental aspects, how do we offer consistency because we come with such varying backgrounds? There was an example given just this week of one of the practitioners finding 3 little boys in the corner of the room inspecting each other's business. And, then looking at the response of the adult, where the one adult went in quite, we don't do that and that's not what we do, whereas the other adult went in and said, but it is developmentally appropriate, but not necessarily socially acceptable. So how do we get that, how do we become consistent in our approach? And also because in the UK with the EYFS, I believe you have cultural capital. So you're needing to understand the different cultures and what the expectations are of the parents for the teachers. So it actually requires that the practitioners are a lot more multifaceted in their approach, yet still looking, and one of the participants just said it so nicely, still being able to follow the natural development of the child and not going off on some other aspiration, but keeping the child at the center. So that was, it was lovely.
Yes, thank you so much. Really relevant discussion, and interesting that I was wondering if the question will be the question that we will all focus on most, because consistency is a real challenge. Yeah. And even in our own, if you just look at your own practice, are you always 100% consistent day after day? No, because we get up in a different state of mind, and we have, no matter how much we try, we still carry some of the baggage with us. So it's really, really tricky. Heidi.
Hi, okay. We also had a lovely chat. We started, or quite a lot of the chat actually revolved around the children in the classroom and how their relationship with each other also seems to mirror some of what you spoke about with regards perhaps to attachment or younger children looking up to older children. Somebody spoke about the resilience of the children and how you find that within a classroom situation, you have some of the children who are so much more resilient and can push through certain problem-solving activities and others who don't. And again, how sometimes that classroom dynamic manages those expectations. We got stuck quite a bit. I'm afraid it was my fault on the nappies in the nursery, because I was quite alarmed when I heard what you had to say, that you're not allowed to ask parents about that, because in South Africa it's not a problem for us to ask or even make it mandatory or not. So we got quite stuck on that, but also linked to how the class basically figures that out for the children once they start the potty training episode. And then I think we also had a mom of twins in our group who, interestingly enough, spoke about how her twins are same parents, same mother, same father, same house, born at the same time. So it's not like an older sibling or younger sibling, and yet how very different they are, and how that's the impact of the environment has obviously a role to play, but how the individual personalities are unfolding so separately, which was also, yeah, something to think about, something quite interesting. Yeah, and I think that was our group.
Thank you so much, Heidi. How fascinating to think about development of twins alongside and yet together. It's a really, really interesting dynamic. I would also like to thank my group for our discussion. It was fun to have virtually entirely South African contingent. So I was reminded of warmer climes and different cultures. Very, very lovely contributions from most of you. Thank you. We got stuck on this idea of consistency and predictability and how to maintain it in the classroom, and how it's all part and parcel to some extent of the spiritual preparation of the teacher, and how challenging that continues to be for all of us. We also talked a little bit about physical independence and how that independence actually feeds the children's initiative, and from the initiative to the competence. Really, we should really value and share the need for children's independence much more powerfully with parents. And that led us to the challenges of working with parents, particularly post-COVID. And we felt it was important to remind ourselves that the main purpose of nursery education to help the child socialize. So it is a transition from the home environment to the wider environment of the classroom. And it is a transition from the very egocentric perspective of life to learning to defer gratification and use one's will in an appropriate way, so that we can really begin to think about the wills and needs of others. And I think that is at the heart of what all this theory tells us. Then when we work with very young children, helping them to develop personally and socially is in a way the most important foundation that we are giving them for life, because they get that internal working model of relationships. And if those relationships are respectful and caring and consistent, hopefully their outlook on life will be more positive and more purposeful. So I think on that note, hoping to give you some belief that what you do is important and it was striving for, not only because Freud has told us, because the children every day remind us that some of these theories are very relevant to what we do. I wish you well for the months, and we will tackle another challenging topic in a month's time when we will explore idea of gender stereotyping and what it really means to our practice. So thank you everybody very much, and we'll see you in a month's time. Thank you.